If you think you already know Germany well, you have probably never seen this city. It is a true hidden gem in the Bavarian landscape, known for its unique architecture and more than 2,400 historic buildings. It is a city where people looked at problems differently and focused on finding solutions. Because honestly, who builds a town hall in the middle of a river simply because they cannot get any land? But it is also a city of grandeur, with an enormous palace containing halls where you can spend hours looking around. Or you can simply enjoy a wonderful walk along the river and take in the peace and quiet. Let me take you to a city full of stories and beautiful places. Welcome to Bamberg. After visiting 5 incredible German cities such as Rothenburg, Regensburg, and Heidelberg, it is time for the final city I will visit on this trip. About 50 kilometers north of Nuremberg, where I was in the previous video, lies the beautiful city of Bamberg. I arrive in the city early in the morning, and while driving through the old town, I can immediately see that this is a city with stunning architecture and beautiful historic buildings. I park my car along the banks of the Regnitz. This river is the lifeblood of the city and has been essential both for economic activities such as shipping and from a historical perspective. As I continue walking through the city, I come across the river again, not the wide canalized section, but the old river that flows right through the historic center. This area is also known as Little Venice because of the picturesque fishermen's houses lining the banks. From this part of the river, I walk further into the city, where it is still very quiet in the morning. With the empty streets and terraces, it is the perfect time to admire the historic buildings. Unlike Nuremberg, which I visited in the previous video, Bamberg was almost completely spared during the war. This was largely thanks to the city's mayor who, unlike the fanatical Nazi officers, surrendered the city peacefully to the Americans despite orders to do otherwise. He knew that if he did not, it would lead to the total destruction of his beloved city. One man therefore saved the entire city, allowing us to still admire these magnificent original buildings from centuries ago today. After a short climb uphill, I arrive at Domplatz. This unique square is surrounded by monumental buildings from different centuries and takes you back as much as 1,000 years in history. Here you will find the Bamberg Cathedral, a massive Romanesque and Gothic cathedral from the Middle Ages, the Alte Hofhaltung, which was once the old palace of the bishops, and the enormous Baroque palace known as the Neue Residenz. I begin my visit in this palace, which was built between 1697 and 1703 by Prince Bishop Lothar Franz von Schönborn. He considered the old medieval castle too cold, too dark, and above all, not impressive enough. Once inside, you can immediately see the grandeur and splendor that this enormous building was meant to project. The whole world was supposed to see how wealthy and powerful the ecclesiastical rulers of Bamberg were. The palace contains more than 40 monumental rooms. A large part of the building can be visited freely, while the bishop's apartments can only be visited as part of a guided tour. Inside, you will find an enormous collection of paintings and beautiful objects that showcase this wealth, with the Imperial Hall as the absolute highlight. This hall is truly the showpiece of the palace and was primarily built as a form of political propaganda. The bishops were still required to swear allegiance to the emperors of the Holy Roman Empire, and by placing them so prominently, with life-sized portraits of emperors adorning the walls, the bishop demonstrated just how closely connected he was to the greatest power in the world. Not only are the walls beautifully decorated, but the ceiling is also breathtaking. With gigantic columns, deep niches, statues, and an enormous dome through which triumphal chariots appear to ride, it creates a spectacular illusion. It feels as though you are looking into a three-dimensional space, but in reality, the entire surface is completely flat. Surrounding the palace is the Rose Garden, where thousands of roses bloom during the summer months. Not only is the garden beautiful, but its location on an elevated terrace also offers a magnificent view over the city, looking out across a sea of red rooftops in the medieval old town. I return to the large square where, in contrast to all the new grandeur, I want to see what the old building looked like that was no longer good enough for the bishops. Fortunately, the structure itself has been preserved. Where the previous building was all about Baroque luxury, here I immediately step into a medieval atmosphere. The Alte Hofhaltung stands on the foundations of the very first castle of the Babenbergs, the noble family from whom the city takes its name. In the year 1007, the emperor donated this castle to the newly established bishopric, and for centuries it remained the official residence. The courtyard is sometimes used as a filming location, including for the Hollywood movie The Three Musketeers from 2011. Today, the building houses the city's historical museum, making it the perfect place to learn more about Bamberg. You will find an extensive collection of paintings and sculptures, including masterpieces from the late Middle Ages and the Renaissance. Perhaps the greatest attraction, however, is simply walking through the old building itself and experiencing the contrast with the Neue Residenz. The rooms are made entirely of wood, and some even feature timber-framed interiors. Walking across the creaking wooden floors, you get a clear sense of the difference between the old residence and the new palace, and you can somewhat understand why a new building was eventually chosen. Through the beautiful gate, I leave the museum and this old court to visit the third and final site on the square. The bishops were not located here by coincidence. After all, it was situated right next to the enormous cathedral. Construction of the cathedral began as early as the year 1004, but it was destroyed twice by major fires. The current cathedral was consecrated in 1237, during a period that marked the transition between two architectural eras. As a result, you can see different styles throughout the building, including Romanesque elements as well as Gothic features. Inside, several objects immediately draw your attention, including the magnificent tomb of the founders of the city, Emperor Henry II and his wife. The tomb is richly decorated with scenes from legends associated with the couple and is a true gem within the church. Not far from this tomb stands the famous Bamberg Rider. This sculpture dates back to the construction of the cathedral and is considered one of the most important medieval artworks in the world. The statue remains a mystery. No one truly knows who the rider represents or what the original purpose of this remarkable figure, so prominently displayed within the cathedral. A display board lists all the bishops from the beginning of the bishopric, and the cathedral is also home to the only officially recognized papal tomb north of the Alps. The bishop who later became pope loved the city so much that he wished to be buried here after his death in Rome in 1047. I leave Domplatz and head back into the Old Town. Here, you can clearly see the differences in architectural styles, from medieval timber-framed houses to Baroque townhouses with ornate facades. Some buildings even still display their original medieval signs from old guilds or bakeries hanging from the front of the building. Another thing the city is famous for is its Rauchbier, or smoked beer. I step inside a small medieval brewery dating back to 1405, where you can immediately smell the craftsmanship. This dark beer was, like many beers of that era, brewed using smoked grains and malt, giving it a distinctive and intense flavor. While breweries elsewhere gradually changed the way they dried their ingredients, Bamberg continued to use the traditional method. As a result, you can quite literally taste the Middle Ages here. I ventured deeper into the city center, returning to the river that flows through the old town. Standing in the middle of the river is the city's most iconic landmark, the Old Town Hall. The river once formed the boundary between the Bishop's Hilltop town, where I have just come from, and the Civic Island town. The citizens wanted their own town hall, but the powerful bishop refused to give them even a single centimeter of land. The townspeople came up with a clever solution. They drove hundreds of wooden piles into the flowing river and created an artificial island on which they built the town hall, right on the border, so that the bishop officially had no authority over it. Over the centuries, the building was expanded several times and developed its striking appearance, with beautiful murals covering its facades and a small timber-framed house attached to the side, seemingly floating above the water. This served as a guard post for the city commander. Because the town hall is part of a bridge, you can walk straight through it. In the past, it functioned as a heavily guarded gateway between the ecclesiastical and civic parts of the city. Around the town hall, you will find the beating heart of the city center, with lively streets, beautiful buildings, charming squares, and wonderful views over the river. From the town hall, I continue into the Civic quarter, where the Neptune fountain stands on the Grünermarkt, and where you will also find the Baroque Catholic parish church of St. Martin. This church was built by a famous family of architects between 1686 and 1693 and was originally part of the Jesuit monastery. What makes the church unusual is that it is essentially built the wrong way around. Normally, the altar of a church faces east, but because the Jesuits wanted the impressive facade to face directly onto the market square, they constructed the church with the altar facing west instead. The interior is a beautiful example of Baroque architecture and features a remarkable painting in the dome on the ceiling as well. Before long, I arrive at Maximiliansplatz, the largest square in the city and the modern heart of daily life in Bamberg. It was designed in the 19th century as the central gathering place for the city's residents and is surrounded by impressive, stately facades, including the Baroque New Town Hall from 1730, which still serves as the seat of the city government today. Walking through this part of the city, between the riverside districts, you can notice that it is somewhat younger than the area around Domplatz. This is especially apparent along Langstrasse. Although this area has medieval origins, something changed during the 17th and 18th centuries. The wealthy bourgeois elite and the nobility no longer wanted to live in the old, dark, medieval, timber-framed houses. The prince-bishops offered generous subsidies to anyone willing to modernize their home, which led to the construction of magnificent Baroque facades richly decorated with ornamental details. As a result, these buildings appear much younger than they actually are. In many cases, however, the foundations and rear sections of the houses are still of medieval origin. Along the edge of the old town, I walk through a small green oasis where a statue of Prince Regent Luitpold of Bavaria stands. He ruled after his nephews, including the fairy tale king Ludwig II, were declared incapable of governing. The period during which he ruled is often referred to as the good old days because of the tremendous economic growth, peace, flourishing arts, and the modernization of cities, including developments such as the introduction of tram lines in Bamberg. In Bamberg, you can also see the remnants of a centuries-old dream, a direct waterway connecting the North Sea and the Black Sea. As early as 793, Charlemagne attempted to dig a canal, but the project failed. Around 1,000 years later, the Bavarian king Ludwig I took the idea seriously once again. Between 1836 and 1846, more than 9,000 workers labored on a 172-kilometer-long canal connecting Kelheim and Bamberg. With more than 100 locks, the canal had to overcome a significant difference in elevation, and the lock in Bamberg was the 100th lock along the route. Although the canal was finally opened in 1846, it was already becoming obsolete due to the arrival of the railways. Large sections of the canal were later filled in, but in Bamberg it has been beautifully preserved. Today, it has been replaced by a much larger canal, which I also encountered during my journey to Regensburg. Along the river, I make my way back toward the city center. On the riverbank stands Villa Concordia, a Baroque palace built between 1716 and 1722 on the orders of a very wealthy and influential advisor to the Prince Bishop. The first crossing over the water is the Obere Mühlbrücke, a place closely connected to the city's historic mills. Thanks to the power of the water and the difference in elevation, grain was milled here for bread production, but the water was also used to power sawmills and tanneries. Here too, you will find several structures built over the water, creating beautiful views through the river landscape. With the large golden sculpture rising above the bridge, the contrast between the historic buildings and modern art is striking. It perfectly demonstrates that the city does not solely rely on its past, but also embraces modern life. I leave the river behind and begin the climb to one of the 7 hills on which the city was built. Along the way, I once again encounter beautiful architecture, magnificent facades, and picturesque streets. At the top of the hill stands St. Stephen's Church. This fascinating chapter in the city's history is the most important Protestant church in Bamberg and has a unique floor plan in the shape of a Greek cross, whereas most medieval churches were built in the form of a Latin cross. The church was consecrated in 1020 by the Pope after the Empress commissioned its construction. Its current white appearance dates from the 17th century. From above, it is easy to see that 4 major churches were built on the city's hills, with their towers aligned in almost a straight line. This is no coincidence, but rather a brilliant example of medieval urban planning with deep spiritual symbolism. The founder of the city had a very specific vision for his new settlement. It was to become a Roman and heavenly Jerusalem, with the churches playing a central role. Their alignment demonstrated to everyone approaching the city that the emperor ruled by divine mandate. The second church in this line is the Obra Fada. While many of the city's churches began as Romanesque buildings and were later transformed into Baroque churches, this 14th century church has retained its Gothic exterior. However, once you step inside, you quickly see that the Baroque artists also took complete control of the interior during the 18th century. The result is a spectacular display of decoration and paintings, and in my opinion, the ceiling of the church is absolutely breathtaking. With its countless details, it is a place that is well worth stepping inside to admire. Leaving the church, I cross the Bischofsmühlbrücke and head once more toward the beautiful town hall. This part of the city also features several bridges where weirs regulate the flow of the water. North of the town hall stands the old slaughterhouse along the riverbank. In the past, animal waste could simply be thrown into the river and carried away by the current. It is probably for the best that this no longer happens today. I leave the city and visit one final location on the highest hill of all. At an elevation of 400 meters stands the impressive medieval Altenburg Castle. The first records of this castle date back to 1109, and it was not originally intended as a residence. Instead, it served as a heavily fortified stronghold where the citizens and the prince-bishops could seek refuge whenever the city below came under attack. It was not until the 14th and 15th centuries that the castle was significantly expanded into a permanent residence for the bishops. In 1553, the castle was almost completely destroyed, with only the imposing tower and parts of the surrounding walls surviving. For centuries, it remained a ruin until, around 1800, a local physician decided that it deserved to be saved. He founded an association that still manages and preserves the castle to this day. The grounds are freely accessible, and for a small fee, you can climb the impressive tower, from which you have a magnificent view over both the city and the castle complex itself. It is therefore a wonderful place to bring my day in Bamberg and my journey through Germany to a close. It has been a trip during which I visited some of the most beautiful places and learned a great deal about German culture and history. Of course, there are still many other beautiful places around the world waiting to be explored, so be sure to subscribe so you do not miss them. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and let me know which German city you found the most beautiful. Thanks for watching, and see you soon.